All right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Phil Ferguson Show. We're going to do an interview with Abbie Smith. How are you, Abbie?
I told you I'm a little tired. It's been a rough month,
Right.
uh,
Yeah, rough month.
rough month or so, but still treading water, still
Yeah,
going.
yeah. So I am having you on as a science expert. Is that okay?
Yes,
And,
yes.
and you,
I'm a PhD scientist. I have well, at this point, I describe myself as having a PhD in the forbidden sciences because I studied evolution in Oklahoma. I study HIV and vaccine responses and worked on COVID. And now I actually work on the intersection of sex and gender in our immune responses. So if you can think of any kind of controversial science, I apparently am drawn to that. So that's what I'm up to these days.
absolutely. And I think, would it be fair to say that you consider yourself somewhat of a science educator? You want to teach people how it works and how it doesn't
Yes,
work?
yes.
Okay.
So, back when I was a grad student, I did lots of educational outreach and so forth in teaching normal folks about evolution and why it's really important for us to understand and study in the lab. And also, vaccines. Why are vaccines important? What's the science behind vaccines? Um, and now I'd like to talk to you a bit today, and especially on your show, about the finances of
Yes.
science, because that, to be clear, has been under attack since January 20th. And I'm not sure, just everyday average folks know how this directly affects them.
Yeah, and it's all coming under the guise of fraud and deception and misappropriation of funds and the cutting off the spigot to all kinds of things that they clearly do not understand how things in the world work. I mean, we even have an example to take it. This is me being political, not you. When you fire people that are in charge of the nuclear weapons and you have to turn around and hire them back, something's fucked up.
Yes.
And as my listeners, oh my God, as my listeners know, I've talked about this from time to time, and I have some more ideas coming up shortly that we won't share tonight about finance. But it's really important for us to understand the money of research, the money that is necessary to do science. So I'm going to leave it pretty open. You go wherever you want to, and if I get interesting questions in the meantime, I'll jump in and nudge you one way or the other. But what do you got for us?
So, first of all, you should in no way, shape, or form feel silly about not knowing any of this because it is all very specific for the only reason anybody should really know about this is if they're a professional scientist and they have to do this in order to get money to perform the research. And so, I'm asking you, what do you think I do? Like, what do I have to do to get money where do you think I get the money to do my
Well,
research?
I'm assuming for most university-based research, it's all grant-based. And so
Yes.
you have
Yes.
to write up a fancy schmancy report with charts and graphs and a couple PowerPoint slides or something like that. And you submit it to multiple organizations, hoping that some of your grants for some of your projects get approved, and then money just falls from the sky, right?
You got it. You got it. That's the
And
main
then
idea.
you've got to hire college students to help you so they get experience and a little bit of money. And the university has enough money to keep paying you. And you do all this research and you publish things. And hopefully something that you publish is statistically significant, a p-value less than zero point zero 0.05, right? Is that what
Yeah.
we're looking for?
Yes.
And then other people could say, hey, I think I saw an error in what you did and correct it. Or they can say, that's interesting. That applies to my research in this way. And you never know where it's going to end up.
Exactly.
Did I get
Um,
some of that right?
you did a lot of it. So most of our funding, at least, in my institution, which is a primarily research-based institution. And so let's start at the top. Let's start at the NIH, and that's where most of our funding comes from. So we'll have, like, for example, the American Heart Association or breast cancer organizations and so forth, where we can also apply to get funds. But the bulk of our funds come from the National Institute of Health. And at the NIH, there are professional scientists who really are more in the administrative side of things. And I kind of, if anyone gets this reference, they're like the Watchers in the Highlander
Yeah.
series. Like they are the shepherds of science and the shepherds of all of the scientists around the United States. And so they work for institutions within the NIH. So let's say the National Institute of Aging or digestive and kidney diseases, or there's little specialized houses underneath the NIH. And what I can do as an investigator is write that fancy document that's, let's say, about 150 pages to 200 pages. This is not a casual affair. This is a massive document.
Not a junior
Uh,
high book report.
no, these are highly regimented um, documents, and really only about 12 pages, 12 to 13 pages are actual, hey, what's the science? There's a lot of references. There's a lot of things about our institutions and what kind of resources we have. There's lots of documentation on like who I am and why I'm a valid person to do this research. And the scientists call them many of them are called program officers at the NIH. They shepherd in all of these applications. Now, on occasion as well, they will have very specific ideas. And so instead of me just submitting something to the National Institute of Aging, they'll say, hey, we actually want to know more about how the microbiome influences the development of Alzheimer's. And so that will be like a little separate thing that you can apply to that's not like the broad category. Or, how does surviving pediatric cancer influence the development of cardiovascular disease later in life? The more specific things as opposed to those big, broad houses. So they curate all of these applications from all of the scientists all around the world. And then they send them out to other scientists who get paid like we do get paid, you get paid $100 or so to serve on something called study section. And that is when a group of, let's say, 20 investigators come together, review 80 of these 100, 200-page documents, and they go through and evaluate and say, okay, how good are these investigators? And they get a score. How good is this institution? They get a score. What is the impact, the potential impact of this research? And they get a score. How innovative is the science? What do you think about the actual science in the document? That gets a score. And then they all get together and meet. It's called study section to discuss and score these documents. There are some reviewers who kind of serve as really the main reviewers and are kind of like the lawyers who are arguing to the rest of the panel as a jury on, hey, this is a really exciting proposal. You all should fund it, or they need some work. So then the scores get sent out. It's like golf, lower score is better.
Okay.
And then, so it used to be that, let's say if you scored in the top 25th percentile, your grant got funded. Hooray. We know that it's called the pay line. The current pay line for that I normally submit to is the 8th percentile. So you have to be in the top 8% of grants
Right.
to be funded now, which is,
Nuts.
it highlights
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
competitive things are, what the funding situation is like. Um, and really just how cutthroat this whole situation is. So let's say the pay line's 8 and you scored at the 10th percentile. What happens? Well, you get your comments back from those reviewers. They wrote down what they liked and what they didn't like about your proposal, and the program officer took notes on what everybody was discussing. And you revise it and you say, okay, I can address this, I can address that. We got more preliminary data for this. And you put it in again as a revised application. So just to give you an idea of the timeline of getting a grant funded,
Yeah.
my R01, I started writing the end of 2020. I submitted it
What did
three
you start
times.
writing?
Yeah, yeah, I started writing
No,
at
what
the
was
end
the
of
name of it?
the proposal.
Yeah, you said R1 or something like that.
Oh, sorry. Yes. So that's, See, there's all this like jargon that's just like like everyday normal to
Yeah.
us because it's our job, but not to normal people. So an R01 is a grant where you normally get about $500,000 a year for
Okay.
5 years. This is the backbone of academic research in the United States in R01. You can have more preliminary, or we want to develop like a little more tentative research. It's called an R21, and that's 2 years of $250,000. There's also U grants and P grants and much larger grants, but the backbone of research in the United States are R01s. That's what moves science forward. So yes. So I
And,
started
and,
writing.
and if I can ask,
Yeah.
it's a pedantic thing. Forgive me. R01, do you mean not O, but zero?
Zero. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
R01.
All right.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Um, but yeah, so I started writing the end of 2020. Now you can only submit at certain times. I can't just submit a grant tomorrow. There's very specific deadlines. And in my field, the HIV research community, it is January 7th, May 7th, and September 7th. Now those little,
Because that's just the way it is.
it's the way it
Right.
is, except for some of these like special announcements might be at different times. Um, so it's not as if I get my feedback back and I can resubmit tomorrow. No, I get my feedback back from the previous cycle about 4 weeks before the next deadline. So you have 4 weeks to either put it in or go, I need more time to revise this. And you skip a cycle and you go again the next cycle.
And so I'm guessing you don't want to have all your egg in one basket.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. You want to have things staggered. You want to, I always try to anticipate, oh, the reviewers are going to ask for X, Y, and Z. So while it's being reviewed, let's start working on X, Y, and Z. And then you get the comments back and they didn't care about X, Y, Z and all. They were actually focused on something else.
Yeah.
My psychic abilities are still not quite there.
So this, of
Um,
course, because of the competitive nature and the challenge
yes,
with it, it
yes,
consumes much of your time as a
yes,
scientist fucking
yes,
around with paperwork.
yes.
Okay.
But it's fun. It's
Ah,
really creative. So as you kind of move up the pipeline, so let's say a technician or a graduate student might be doing quite a bit of bench work. Postdoc is doing some bench, sorry, after you get your PhD,
right.
there's another period of training called a postdoc. And they're still doing quite a bit of science, but kind of learning the ropes for how to submit these kinds of grants. And then yes, once you are a principal investigator, PI is what it's called, you spend a lot of your time writing these grants because that's how we keep the lights on in the lab. That's our careers. If we don't continually get this funding, then we don't have jobs. So, like for example, my university does not pay 100% of my salary. My university will pay up to 35% of my salary. The rest of my salary has to be made up from my grants or other projects I'm
Like
working
a
on.
sales job.
Yeah,
You got to get the grants. You're not going to get paid much.
exactly.
And now, what's going on in the world today that maybe sparked us to have this conversation?
Yes.
Oh, mind me asking.
So initially, when the latest administration came in, there was a pause, a communications pause placed on the NIH. Really, the everybody here really in the federal side of things, and that was curious. There's no precedent for that. Just to be clear, I don't want to normalize that and say, oh yeah, you just a new administration comes in and there's that doesn't happen. This is a very large machine that just keeps on moving. Nobody hits
Because
the brakes.
theoretically, everyone that works at the NIH is interested in science and
Yes,
helping humanity and
yes,
curing diseases, preventing diseases.
yes.
They don't really fucking care who's at 1600
No,
Pennsylvania, and they're
no.
just doing their job. But this time it was different. And what do we call it? NIHS interruptus? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. So that was the first um issue. And the problem was, again, this is a huge machine that never stops, but there were study sections scheduled for this pause time. They're called scientific advisory council meetings. That's when they make final decisions on, yes, we're funding this, no, we're not funding that. That has been paused. So proposals that were submitted last September 7th should have been an advisory council meeting in January. It doesn't matter whether they scored in the top, if they were the top grant of the whole submission cycle, a perfect grant. They're not funded right now, even though they should have been approved in January. Because there's a pause on something as well called the Federal Register. So there's this webpage that I have bookmarked that I go to all the time, that just all information from the NIH saying, from this group saying, hey, we want to study this, give us proposals for this, or updated information on that. There's been no update on this webpage since January 22nd. That's
Right.
completely unheard of. Numerous times a week, this page is updated with information. There's been nothing, except on, let me check, on a different tab, February 7th, they released notification that this administration was not going to recognize any of the negotiated contracts with every institution for something called indirect cost. So I mentioned, for example, in RO1, I get $500,000 a year. And that's for my salary, my technician salary, my nurses, my recruitment team, tubes, pipette tips,
Right.
reagents we need for the cutting edge research that we do, single cell transcriptomics, generating patient-specific organoid cultures, spatial transcriptomics, microbiome sequencing, all this stuff we have to do for $500,000 a year. What we don't have to do is factor in electricity, water, maintenance of our research buildings, security, all of the people at the university that help us submit these grants. So we've got lots of financial people that go over these documents and help us with I mean, I'm a scientist.
Yeah.
I'm not a financial person. So in addition to that $500,000 a year, the home university for these grants gets something called indirect costs to help pay for like just keeping the lights on.
Yeah. Basic building maintenance,
Yeah.
utilities.
And this has been negotiated. Every institution has a negotiated rate with NIH. We have negotiated rates with all the private companies, Pfizer or Gilead, that we do studies with. Again, this is just something that's done because I can't do this research in my backyard, right? Like
Yeah.
I need the infrastructure. And in addition to that, there's lots of equipment. There are something called core labs on campus who, like, I don't have to buy a sequencer because there's a core lab that has that instrument and pays for the service contracts on it. And like, because I couldn't afford that instrument with $500,000 a year to do research. So this administration just said, hey, we're not gonna acknowledge these contracts that have already been signed and sent out. Um, we're gonna bring everything like indirects from 50% down to 15%. The rate for like a indirects for a non-negotiated contract or something like 25% or something like that. So it's like it's a completely arbitrary number, this 15%. Um, so like again, you could get a perfect score in an RO1 and the university could say, we can't provide the facilities and support that's needed to execute this grant. And so you'd have to turn it down. Um,
Wow.
yeah,
And I can almost imagine uh, really smart seeming people who don't know anything outside of marketing, like being able to market an electric car, as a theoretical example. Uh, they just hear what you described and they just hear blah, 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 blah,
yeah,
blah. And then they go, but what do I get out of it?
yeah.
After you get the 500,000 at the end of the year, what do you present that I can sell? Is it a box of cereal? Is it a car? Is it a building? Or is it just ideas floating around? And they're like, yeah, we're not spending billionaires' tax money to let you have a party.
So every year we have to submit something called a progress report. So we send our program officers, hey, this is what we've spent the money on. This is what we found so far. This is what we plan to do in the next year. And frankly, they can look at that and say, you're not meeting the goals that you outlined in your proposal. So we're not going to give you the money.
So wait a
They can
minute.
do that.
There was already a system in place. Uh, dare I say checks and balances to,
Yes.
first of all, make sure,
Completely independent.
yeah, make sure that you're legit
Yeah.
and you're following the program, the historical process. You're not just some fly-by-night person working in your basement. You're associated with a big university institution. And then there's checkups to make sure you're
Yes.
actually doing what you're
Yes.
supposed to do to get the money. So that's already being done. It's part of the system. And
Yes.
I don't know if people would, I wouldn't have known that. I
Yeah.
just, once you win the grant, you win the grant, right? But
No.
you're saying every year you've got to prove that you're doing what you promised you were going to do.
Yes. And at the end of that 5 years, let's say you've done everything. It's been stellar. You've got all these really cool new hypotheses that you've formulated from all the data you've collected these last 5 years and published. Um, you can renew that R01, but you have to send it in again for peer review. It has to go to study section again, and a completely different panel of investigators says, "Yeah, they've excelled. This is fantastic. We want them to keep going. So let's keep the ball rolling." Or they can say, "You know what? Not good enough." And that's the end of it.
So what happens if the spigot turns off and never gets turned back on?
That's where we're at right now.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I'm assuming you're employed today.
yes. So I every year you get something called a notice of award. The NOA for my R1 was issued last December. So I have money through the end of this December. Um,
Theoretically.
Theoretically, and whether the rest of my grant is acknowledged. I mean, if we're just, changing the terms of everything, who knows?
Right.
Like, and a lot of this is, yeah, I'm a scientist. I can't litigate any of this, and so we're dependent on our institutions and our states suing the administration to get them to acknowledge.
Like play nice to get them to play nice. Now,
Yeah.
um, could it be argued, would it be a reasonable conclusion to assume that if a university, not yours, but just in general, a university uh, has trouble getting these grants and other grants and getting money to flow, at some point they're going to have to shrink something and they're going to
Hmm.
have to let people go.
Yeah.
And I would assume if there's 50 such universities in the United States that are doing this stuff, 5 or 10 of them might say, hey, you know what? We make more money with basketball.
Hmm.
Let's not do any more research. It's too painful. It's costing us more money than it's bringing in. And they just end the programs.
Hmm.
And of course, you have an oversupply of scientists and an undersupply of work. So your wages aren't going to go up. You're going to be
Yeah.
happy to have a job paying whatever they pay you. And then, of course, that means some of the research is not going to be done. And what does the average American who's paying taxes get from this very fancy schmancy research anyway?
Yes. So it's not only so there's a spectrum of research, right? There's people doing research in zebrafish and fruit flies that 10 years from now turns out to be a cure for Alzheimer's. Like we don't know. We do
Yeah,
lots of basic research to really understand the universe and how it works and what's going on. And especially like with all these, we've got the coolest technology right now to do some really amazing science that I couldn't have even imagined back when I was in grad school. Uh, so there's basic science, and then there's translational science, like what I do. And it's working more with people in a clinical setting. And then there are clinical trials. It's, taking that final science across the finish line and making sure that it's safe for you and me to get.
right.
Well, the problem is many of these, well, first of all, if you don't do the basic research, there's nothing to feed into the pipeline to reach those new innovations 20 years from now. If you don't train graduate students, there's no one there to do the science and be the principal investigator in 20 years. And that's actually a problem many institutions are dealing with now. Because if we're not sure what the funding situation is, we can't figure out how many graduate students to admit in our upcoming classes. Um, and as far as, let's say, the translational clinical science, we can't just say, oh, industry, just go to industry. Industry will figure it out. I
Wow.
work at an academic research institution. Private companies come to us to help run their clinical trials because they do not have the infrastructure. They do not have the recruitment teams. They don't have the nurses. They don't have the pharmacists. They don't have people like men on the ground
Right.
in cities all around the world to execute clinical trials. So if we don't get the clinical trials, or they're slow, like every delay across this pipeline delays the cure to whatever you are interested in. The science I have held up right now studies how the medications we take influences our microbiome and how that influences inflammation in our gut and systemic inflammation. Because we're learning more and more, our gut is an immune organ. Our microbiome is really important. And, people are worried about taking antibiotics and how that affects things. It's a super cool proposal. We can't do it until we get the
Yeah.
funds. I'm on study section later this week, reviewing proposals from the National Institute of Aging. Many of these proposals are on Alzheimer's. All of the proposals are on improving our quality of life as we get older. I want these investigators to succeed so
Right.
that when I get older, my quality of life is improved.
Fair
Like
enough.
whether your pet cause is heart disease or breast cancer, or I mean, like this is literally affecting every single one of us, whether you're a scientist or not, whether you think about fruit flies or not.
Right.
Um,
And one of the things I think about from a financial perspective, not only is it potentially losing the money that you need to do all of these projects and all this research, but the um, the chaos, the
yeah,
chaos of it all also takes away on another level because then people in the business world, businesses don't want to build new factories and spend billions of dollars on a plant or spend $500 billion to build a steel fabrication plant to make more steel in the United States if they think the tariff is going to be on again and off again. So now what you kind of get is everyone just tightens up their sphincter and sits back
mhm.
and waits for it to settle out and nothing happens. Is that a possible problem with everything that you're doing?
Um, I think directly how this affects us more is that, the mental load is focused on this chaos instead of
Yeah.
our work. And it is very difficult to, like, our job, you think of scientists as, nerds, it's incredibly creative
Yeah.
and incredibly really artistic. And it is hard to really be your best when so much of your mental energy is kind of grinding away at this chaos. And to be clear, we've done some really amazing things in the lab in the past couple of weeks, some amazing things that I've wanted to do for years, and they finally worked. And it's just beautiful and it's so exciting. And part of my brain is saying, what's the point?
Yeah, yeah, I can see merit in that concern. If you don't mind, and if you're not up to speaking on it, measles, measles
Yeah.
outbreak in Texas, New Mexico. What's going on there and why?
So for any kind of protection, immune protection, you need a certain percentage of your population to be resistant to a disease. And that other people's resistance can protect the people who don't have resistance. So people who are too young to have vaccines or elderly or people who are sick, they need to, and it's different for every virus or every pathogen because some viruses are more transmissible than others. So if that protection rate is below what's necessary to keep everyone safe and healthy, then this starts to happen. It's literally a statistical inevitability.
And is it true that just because you have a vaccination doesn't mean you're automatically immune from something? Because
Yes.
if more people, like you're vaccinated and everybody's vaccinated, you're probably pretty good. If
Yeah,
it's
yeah, it's
just
fine. It's
if it's just
fine.
you with 20
Yeah.
people around you that aren't vaccinated, they all get sick. You're in the same area with them. The virus is all around. And not only does that dramatically increase your probability of getting ill as a vaccinated person, but the more people that have measles in this case, I think it is, the greater the chance that it could actually evolve, unlike what Christians tend to think. And it could be something different that now the vaccine that we've been getting for 30, 40, 50, 60 years doesn't really cut it anymore. Is that possible?
So I would say that's more of a concern for different two questions here. One is, could you be vaccinated and not actually as protected as you think you are? Yes, that actually happened to me. I knew for a fact that I got all of my MMR vaccines, but when I started a new job, they had our titers checked for common vaccines because we work
Yeah.
with non-human primates and we don't want the primates to get sick. We also wanted baseline values just in case I got exposed to something, we could go back and say, wait, you didn't have
What
anybody.
is that titers thing you mentioned?
Yes.
What the
How
hell is
many,
that?
how many antibodies, sorry, how much protection you have against a particular virus?
Is it just MMR or is that whatever they
It's
test?
it's a widespread term, so we could
Okay.
we could talk about your COVID titer, we could talk about an influenza titer. It's a more broad term. How
So,
protected are
so should
you
I so
against a thing?
should I ask my doctor, hey, run the titer test? Is that how it would be phrased to
I
see
think you could. I
what
think you
what
could.
my load is? And they might say, oh my God, the last time you had a measles shot was when you were born, when you in the
Yeah.
1970, and it's been 55 fucking years. Maybe I should get an update. Is that even a
So
thing?
that's yes. So that's like, for example, the shingles vaccine.
Yeah, yeah.
That's kind of like you only get it when you're older because lots of people, your immune system forgets
Okay.
sometimes, forgets some things, especially as we get older.
And that
And so
titer is the way to measure that.
yeah, well, you get it revaccinated to boost up the titer,
Yeah.
is the way you would say that. But yes, so they in this test they look for my antibodies to specific viruses, and I always forget which one. It was either measles or mumps that my immune system was just like, I had never seen that before. I don't know what that is. So
Yeah.
I had to get another booster of the MMR as an adult to remind my immune system, like, no, you've seen this. Come on. Um,
I'm
but
extra
that
excited about this. This is all new to me, which is great. I get to learn things. I the next time business hours are, because we're doing this late at night because of your work, I'm gonna call my doctor and say, submit this to the testing facility and
you
have it
should,
done.
okay, here's it. You should be okay. However, if you are traveling to a place where measles or mumps is endemic, let's say you're going to Africa or apparently Texas,
Yeah.
you might want to make sure that is, but it's not like, don't, your immune system should remember things. And especially if you were exposed to the virus,
Yeah.
that would almost be like an internal revaccination, and your immune system would be like, oh crap, and rush to catch up to take care of that situation.
So how do we
Um,
fix what's going on in Texas?
I think that's a question that requires many answers on many levels. Um, yeah, I think disturbingly, the vaccine denial and vaccine hesitancy has really only increased
Indeed. Indeed.
over time. And I'm not an MD, I'm a PhD, and I might give different advice than a physician would. But I think all we can do at this point is make sure that yourself and your family is protected with science the best you can. Um, but we can't control the behaviors of other people. If people want to drink and drive, we can make it illegal, but we could still, go to the grocery store tonight and be hit by a drunk driver. Um, and that's
That's the
what's
way of the
happening
world.
here.
Yeah, nothing's perfect.
Um,
I don't want to cut you off, but
oh,
is there anything else you want to cover or discuss before we wrap up?
yeah, I mean, just overall summarizing these cuts, and they're not even cuts at this point. I'm anticipating more cuts, but these pauses and eruptions and so forth, they're interfering with people's, like, or scientists, our careers.
Right.
We need these funds to keep our jobs, obviously, and these are not like a grant process isn't filing a form. These are really intensive, um, elaborate, cutting cutting edge and cutthroat
Right.
processes. And I am distraught that so much damage has been done really with very little effort.
In a month or so.
No effort, right? Like just signing a piece of paper, like very little thought, very little effort. I've got a close family friend who's dependent on breast cancer researchers finding something soon. And
Yeah.
she doesn't have 4 weeks to just dick around.
Yeah, yeah, and this goes. You mentioned some of the main illnesses, but many others.
Everything, no
Yeah,
matter what your
I would love a
personal
cure
cause
for
is.
diabetes. I don't know.
Yeah,
I haven't talked to quite a while before this, but I've gotten diagnosed with type 2 diabetes.
fiber.
Yeah, fiber. Well, the one doctor said a cup of beans a day,
Yeah, great.
and beans are really good. I like beans, so that's an easy thing. The hardest thing for me, and I've gotten better at it. I used to get a 1 or 2 pound bag of candy and just sit it on my desk and just eat from it like a horse eating from
Me too.
a feed
Me too.
bag.
Me too.
Um,
I wish when I was a kid, I cared as much about grams of fiber as I did grams of protein. I
yeah,
was all obsessed with getting, oh, gotta get nobody is getting sick because they're not eating enough protein. Lots of people are getting sick because they're not eating enough fiber. But if
yeah,
you want me to get on a soapbox
yeah,
tonight, that's
yeah.
my
Well,
soapbox.
maybe we'll have you back in a few months to talk about diabetes. But Abbie, thank you so much for your time. It is greatly appreciated. I know you already worked an entire day, and then you come here to educate me and hopefully some listeners.
Yeah.
And just a reminder for people listening to this in the podcast, you can go to the Phil Ferguson Show on YouTube and see us both making fools of ourselves talking about this important content. But Abbie, once again, thank you for being on the Phil Ferguson Show.
Thanks for having me.